This is an oral history interview conducted for Witness to War, serving a nation project at Nauset Regional High School on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. For the sake of this interview, please state your full name and community in which you now reside.
Donald H. Peltier, and I reside in Sandwich, Massachusetts.
What was your life like before the war?
I was going to school, just about to get out, and I didn't know what I was going to do right away, so I figured I'd fight for my country. And after I got there, it was a little different than when I anticipated it to be.
What war did you serve in?
I served in the United States Marine Corps in the Republic of Vietnam, 1968 to 1969. And I got discharged in 1970.
How did your family react when you told them you were going into the military?
Surprised. And because they knew, I wanted to take some time off after I graduated from high school. And I decided, like I said, to go into the military, serve the United States. And it was more difficult than I anticipated.
Why did you choose to go into the military?
To serve my country and keep everybody, every other war, free. People of our country free. It costs lives to make this country free.
Can you give us some stories about training in the war?
Training in the war. In the war itself or before?
We're training in boot camp.
In boot camp, okay. Yes, it was strenuous. You ran many miles a day, every day, 7 days a week. And you had to crawl under machine gun fire, live machine gun fire. So if you stuck your head up, it was gone. Swimming, we had to do a lot of swimming, crossing rivers, and hand over hand rope climbing. That was to just build your stamina, because I don't think I would have survived that wound if I wasn't in top physical shape. And this is the reason why, one of the reasons why they do that.
Describe a typical day in the war for you.
Typical day, depending on if you were out of your fire base. If you were in your fire base, you were relatively safe, not 100%, but everything you did, you brought your rifle with you. When you take a shower, you bring your rifle in the shower with you, because you'll never know what's if they're gonna overrun the compound. And we'd sit around reading books, BS, read our mail. And that was about it. I was never one to do drugs like some of these guys did over there, smoking pot and other things. But I was straight as an arrow because I didn't want to be under anything if I was going to be shot at.
Where are you stationed during the war?
I was in Da Nang, and we went out to the DMZ, just south of the DMZ. And we would, the job was to set up ambushes or search for the enemy and kill as many enemies as we could. And that's how it basically went, and that's the reason why we had a lot of trouble winning that war.
Specifically, what was your job in the war?
My job was being a rifleman, uh, to search and destroy the enemy and and disturb any of the enemy that we could. We had sometimes we had a dog, but most of the time we didn't. And some people had to go into the tunnels that the Viet Cong would pop out of. And the NVA. NVA was the North Vietnamese Army, and the Viet Cong were just guerrilla fighters, and they didn't have uniforms. They had black pajamas.
What is your most vivid memory from it?
Vivid memory was about people being ripped apart by ordnances like mortar rounds, artillery rounds, and small weapons. I remember this little girls that we were helping, that we gave money to, and the Viet Cong would, cut off her hands because she took money from us or help from from our unit. And a couple of kids that found ordnances on the ground that didn't ignite, and the United States would give them money if they found anything on the ground, like canteens, rifles, mortar rounds, anything that was to do with the military, and we would reimburse them for bringing it in. And this, I guess, I don't know exactly how many there was, but it was a group of kids that found a mortar round, and they had dropped it, and it was just a mess. Some kids didn't make it, but that was pretty vivid in your mind. But being a kid, a little kid, 9 years old, 10 years old, and that's what that's what we were there for. The cruelty that comes with war.
Describe the relationship with your colleagues.
Well, everybody tried to watch everybody's back. It was hard though, because a lot of times, like I said before, that if you were new, they don't want to really make friends with you because they didn't know how long you were going to be there. And it's tough when you got. When I went in with another man, and he had to stay behind because he was what they call a fat battalion. He was overweight, so he had to stay there longer, in training than I did. And when you get there, nobody wants to be your friend right away because they don't want to get killed. And you're a newbie, so newbies are kind of like, they walk a little soft when you first get there.
What was the weather like?
The weather was sticky, and you were constantly wet. Your feet were constantly wet. When you wrote letters home, you usually asked to send socks back to you. White socks I preferred because the government would give you dark colored socks. And dark colored socks with wet feet, it's bad enough with wet feet, but with dark, it just, it's a little rough there.
What was the food like?
The food wasn't very good. Most of it was, unless I was back in the fire base, you got canned food, and some of that canned food come back from World War II when I was in.
What was the scariest moment you had to face in the war?
The scariest moment, was we were being shot at, and we would get loading up because we were going back, and that's why they were firing on us, going back to our fire base. And we were out there for a few weeks, and our planes were dropping napalm. And do you know what napalm is? Napalm is a fuel that if it gets on your skin and it ignites, you can't get it off. And that's what we would drop on the enemy, was napalm, and it would explode, and it would just travel so many feet. And like I said, if it gets on you, you're done. There's no way you can get it off. You'll burn up. And I was very afraid of that. They were dropping it awful close. And they do make mistakes. Even the friendlies do make mistakes. So that was one of the scariest times that I was there.
When you think of Vietnam, what is the first memory that comes to your mind?
Death and people, your comrades, trying to help each other. But that was the toughest thing, is the death and body parts that you see all over, and you can't, sometimes you don't even find the dog tags. You just gotta find out who's missing.
How did your expectations compare to the reality of the war?
A lot different than I anticipated. I thought, you go there to fight for the country, but at that time, a lot of the American people did not want us there. And, a lot of the college kids, they just went into college to get out of it. And a lot of guys went to Canada, so they wouldn't have to fight. And that's a lot of Vietnam veterans are pissed off about guys going over to Canada and then coming back. They could come back later, after years later, and not get any reprimand. And then we had that woman there, I don't know if you know about that, Jane Fonda. She goes over there on her own, and talked to the Vietnamese right in there where the prisoners, some of the prisoners were. And they were trying to slip her notes, with their social security numbers or ID number, where they were, how long they'd been there. And she gave them to the Viet Cong, back to the Viet Cong. So not too many people, Vietnam veterans, like Jane Fonda.
Do you have any friends that you kept in touch with from the military?
Yes, but most of them are gone now. And most of them died from one thing or another. Way too early.
What was it like coming back from being in service?
Coming back wasn't very pleasant either. I mean, I was glad to be on United States soil. And I did have a few World War II and some Vietnam veterans that already had been there meet me, that I didn't know, but I knew they were from my hometown. And after that, though, you wouldn't mention, I never mentioned Vietnam for many, many, many years later, that talking to anybody about it. And I had to go to counseling for I still go actually, but not often like I used to. I had to go twice a week for years. But now I can talk about it compared to when you first get back, because they just, a lot of the people would just spit on us and think we were baby killers. And, no, that's not how it went. That was what the label was that was put on us. But that's gone now. Now they see a lot of people. Matter of fact, I just had somebody 2 years ago that I worked with, and his father and his brothers, and he come over to me and apologized to me years later. So it was good to know that he finally woke up, smelled the roses. So.
If you could go back in time, would you have done anything differently?
No, I probably still would have went. Coming back, I don't know if I would or not, to be honest with you. I don't know. I don't think I would. You know, when it's your time to go.
What were your living arrangements like?
What?
What were your living arrangements like when you were stationed there?
Oh, you had tents that you had to go. Shared tent. When you were out in the field, you didn't have tents. You slept under the stars, and then you heard these mosquitoes. That's what I remember a lot. Not sleeping and get my poncho liner over my body with my rifle on top of my poncho with my hand on top of the rifle, close to the trigger. And when it rained, and it rained sometimes really, really bad, you couldn't hear anything when it rained, and that's when the Viet Cong used to like to move. So I could hear the mosquitoes going, and boy, I tell you, it sounds like that you could hear them. They were so loud. And that's when they liked to move, and they were good at camouflage and sneaking up on you.
How did you stay in contact with your loved ones?
Just by letters. We didn't have any telephones that you could call from the bush. It was mostly letters. So by the time you got down, it was, days later or weeks later, depending. And they used to send me cookies and socks, and my aunt would send me rum balls made out of rum. And they were good too. And I used to share them with some of the guys.
Did your upbringing influence your decision to enlist?
I didn't. My father was in the Coast Guard. My great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, he was in the Civil War. Not really. I did it out of being patriotic to my country is why I did it. I mean, this country, gives a lot of people a lot of things for free that you'll never see in any other country. As of right now, we'll see what happens in your lifetime. Things are going to get tougher. As you hear somebody outside.
How did you feel the first time finding out you were going home?
Well, I knew I was going home. I didn't know when. But I was ecstatic that I was going home in one, well, I wouldn't say in one piece, but not in pieces. And some guys, never came back. So all of us veterans gave some, but some of the veterans gave all, and that means their life. Um, and those are the guys that didn't come back are the heroes, of any war.
What is the most memorable experience in the military?
The most
Memorable.
memorable? I guess when I was on leave. And that was a lot of things you had fun doing. A lot of things that you shouldn't have done. But it was getting away with some of your buddies, away from everything. That was memorable. And when I came back on a stretcher plane with a lot of other guys. And we landed in an Air Force base in the Carolinas or Virginia. I can't remember exactly. I think it might have been Virginia. And that's when President Eisenhower, he had died, and his body was in that Air Force base. So we had to stay over because his body was there. And before I came back to Massachusetts. And when I came back, I went to a VA hospital that is closed now. And I can't recall what it was, who it was. But I spent only a few weeks there because the place was so dirty. I asked to get transferred out of there to Newport Naval Hospital, which was actually closer to my home than Boston was. And Chelsea Naval Hospital, that's where I was, Chelsea Naval Hospital in Boston. And I finally got transferred to Newport, and that's where this is.
What was it like being in the hospital?
Ooh, now you asked. A lot of guys that were messed up really, really bad, worse than I was. I saw a guy that was, he got hit by a rocket. The shrapnel from a rocket. And it looked like they had taken his fingers and ripped them out of the sockets that are in there. He had no fingers. Just the socket was all raw. And when he coughed, he was right alongside me. In that picture there. He was over here. He had a trachea thing, tube in there. And when he coughed, the ceilings were 10 feet high. And when he coughed, blood and mucus would shoot out of that hole and stick on the ceiling. And, guys that didn't have any legs, no arms, or no arm. That's the aftermath that people don't see, which they shouldn't anyway. But they should hear about it.
What's the most important thing you learned while you're in the war?
What I learned is try to stop war before it escalates to war. You gotta deplete all your options, all your talking, before they make a decision on doing war, because it's going to cost American taxpayers money and bodies, people. And people have relatives. They have mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters, and they all want to come back to see them. So, some don't.
Did you learn anything while you were serving that you still use today?
Not really. Not really. I don't use any of that. Mindset, maybe. But no skills I brought back from war. And it's like they want you to come back and after going through all that, and they want you to do this.
Why did you come to Cape Cod?
Well, we had one son, and late, and we lived in Rochester in a bigger house, and we moved because he wanted to stop working. He was 16, so we moved to Fairhaven, where it was people were closer. You know, Rochester was houses were far apart, so you couldn't travel. A kid couldn't travel. Your parents would have to take you from place to place. And so we bought him a bike and we moved to Fairhaven, and that's where I grew up. And you got into the wrong crowd. And a man with PTSD like I had didn't help him too much, I guess, either. I mean, I did everything I could, but it was, it was rough on him, I'm sure. Anyway, he turned to drugs, and he wouldn't, he was 18, he wouldn't sign to go into rehab. So his father had to do a couple of illegal things, like, call up the police that I knew and told him that he wanted to commit suicide. And that would automatically qualify him without signing to go in. And it didn't work too well. It worked for a little while, I guess. And so we ripped down the little house that we're in on the beach, well, close to the water, and put up a great big house, figuring he left me a granddaughter, figuring she was 3.5 at the time. And he lived one day in the new house. And he died. Overdose. So, my wife didn't want to live there anymore. We lived there for a few years after he passed, but she didn't want to stay. So she worked in Woods Hole. And she knew a lot of people down here, so I didn't care where I went. So this is the reason why we're down here.
What did you do for a job when you got back from the war?
The first job? Let me see. Thinking back that far. First job, geez, that's a tough question. I guess I pumped gas, I think, for a while. And at first I couldn't hold a job for a long time. I didn't want anybody telling me what to do. So I started